Devin, it's Stacy. I can't connect. I'm trying to connect to UFC 1 and it says it's busy. It says UFC 1 is busy. I can't connect.
Yeah, can you try UFC 2?
I'm connected, but I can't hear anything.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to turn it on. Okay, I'll get in there in just a second.
Okay.
Last month, who had asked to use the bathroom without making a purchase. Schultz said the company is changing its policy because it wants everyone to feel welcome. Schultz went on to say, however, that Starbucks does not want to become a public restroom.
But that's what they're going to do. Welcome to the show, everybody. Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right here on Urban Family Talk and American Family Radio. And you just heard it straight from the president of Starbucks. He is going to open all of the restrooms in all of the Starbucks around the United States and make them basically you can stroll in and use them if you want to. So you don't have to purchase anything. You're not responsible for, presenting yourself in any way, shape, or form. You just show up. You got to go to the restroom. Well, they got a bathroom for you. So how will that work out? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. We won't know what the true ramifications of that decision are for quite a bit because it in some areas it won't make any difference at all. They basically were operating that way anyway. And in other areas where there's homeless issues and things of that nature, it might become a little bit interesting for the patrons of Starbucks. This is a direct result of the liberalism. They're the ones who wouldn't let certain people use the bathroom and other people could. The double standard created the situation with the gentleman that made national news. And now here we are. So welcome to the show, everybody. Great to be with you today. I want to point everybody to the Facebook page, Stacy on the Right Show. Also, guess what? I'm moderating the candidate forum tonight at Rockwood High School out in West County in St. Louis, Missouri. So if you're anywhere near there and you want to hear the Senate candidates in the primary, the gentleman and one lady who are all running against each other, trying to figure out who's going to get the nomination, you have to show up for that at 7:00. And I don't believe there's any access issue. Just show up. You can come in and listen to the forum, listen to the speakers. I have some great questions for them tonight. You guys know I'm really excited about the opportunity to unseat Claire McCaskill. It's been too long with her. That one term with her, it's just been too much. And I can't wait to see which of them comes out on top. Not just tonight, but in the actual primary, and then which of them will move forward to be, hopefully, to best Claire McCaskill, and then move on to be the senator from the great state of Missouri, the Show Me State. So what are we going to talk about today on the program? We're going to talk about whether or not liberalism is a religion. Tucker Carlson says it is. But I want to look at it from the Christian ethos, from our specific context. And we also have two guests for you today. Nicholas Grossman, professor of international relations at the University of Illinois, and Katrina Gulliver. She's a historian, editor, and cultural commentator. She's going to join us as well. And then, of course, you guys, the guests, the listeners, are also going to be our guests. You're going to be with us using the phone lines, which are wide open for you at 866-963-2037. We can't wait to have you join us via the telephone. So if you want to call in, go ahead. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's talk a little bit about this whole liberalism as a religion thing. I wouldn't normally want to make that kind of equation, but we're not talking about straight up Christianity here. We're just talking about religion, the practice of some sort of faith or adherence to a set of ideals that comprise a faith. And that faith can be legitimate or it can be illegitimate. It could be a cult, whatever. So here's Tucker Carlson describing how modern liberalism is a religious movement. And he's framing it within the context of Schneiderman, the attorney general in New York City, who has recently fallen from grace and had a really tough go of things. And I'm not saying that because I feel any sympathy for him. He's a repugnant individual with strange habits towards women, criminal habits that should have been prosecuted. And so he's framing it within that context that even Schneiderman feels he's even at the lowest point in his life, he's still better than someone like me who, is a traditional American and believes in traditional values set forth in the Bible. So let's listen to him. It's number 6.
In the wake of Eric Schneiderman's resignation as Attorney General of New York, some of his longtime friends on the left are professing shock. You've heard them. We just can't believe it, they say. How could a man so publicly committed to feminism beat women? It just doesn't make sense. But of course, it makes perfect sense. Self-righteousness is always a marker for secret creepiness. The people yelling the loudest are usually hiding the most. Keep that in mind the next time you hear some Democratic politician lecturing you about your moral inferiority. That's the guy you need to watch carefully. Chances are he's up to something awful behind closed doors. Hypocrisy isn't just a feature of modern liberalism, it's the heart of modern liberalism. Ever wonder how people who advocate for abortion can say they stand for children? How a movement that demonizes an entire race can claim to oppose racism? The same way Al Gore can travel by private jet while trying to ban your SUV. Because consistency does not matter to the left. Only virtue matters. We're good people, therefore we must rule. You are not, therefore you must obey. Al Gore doesn't believe he's a hypocrite. Eric Schneiderman probably doesn't think he is either. You can't commit sin if your intentions are pure, and liberals believe their intentions are the purest. If that sounds like theology and not public policy, that's because it is theology. Modern liberalism is a religious movement. It's a replacement for the Protestant Christianity that the left works so hard to undermine and destroy. Liberals are speaking the language of faith, albeit a faith without God. This is the main reason that right and left talk past each other. The reason our public debates are so weird and unsatisfying. One side arrives with facts and stats and arguments. The other brags about its decency. One side is trying to convince, the other is trying to convert. You can beat a liberal in an argument, but you can never convince him that you won. He cares much more deeply than you do, and therefore he knows he's right, by definition, and nothing can convince him otherwise.
And this just recently happened to me. Remember earlier this week when I was speaking at Washington University's Lifelong Learning Institute, and during the course of the Q&A, a few people were repetitively raising their hands and trying to make their points, and they wouldn't let go of certain things that they'd said. And so I, at some points, to move on to other people, to give other people a chance to ask questions, I would say, listen, agree to disagree. I've already given you the information, but you're framing the argument as this. And I'm like, it is what it is. I've shared with you my view on it, and I've given you some supporting facts, supporting documentation. And so afterwards, we had, just this whole secondary Q&A where I'm grabbing my purse and I'm getting ready to leave because they had continuing content that they were going to put forward after my portion of the day. So I had an hour and we'd already run over. And one of the people who was very upset with me about my views on abortion came up and said, you said it's bad for the Black community, but you should really be framing it from the religious perspective. And I spent some time thinking about that afterwards. Why was she so adamant that I'm wrong, that abortion is bad for the Black community and for America at large? I did add that in. And I do not feel it is just Black people who are negatively impacted by abortion. I feel we have the largest negative exposure because we have the highest abortion rate. And I explained that as well. And it became clear to me in thinking about it and thinking about what she said, because she even tried to pivot over to the firing of James Comey and how she never would have fired him and that was wrong. And I said, I would have fired James Comey, but I wouldn't have waited as long as President Trump did. When you look at the timeline and the behavior of James Comey, he actually really lasted a lot longer than any normal hiring official would have permitted under the circumstances. James Comey actually didn't want to meet alone with the president. He didn't want to engage the president. He was furtive and secretive. He was keeping a stockpile of a record of all of their conversations that he was typing out in the dark outside the White House every time they met. But more than that, his demeanor towards the president was that of a person who didn't respect him and didn't want to work with him. So the question is, if you are a hiring manager or a CEO or a sole proprietor, it doesn't matter. If you have the ability to say who works for you or who doesn't, as the president does, and it becomes clear to you that one of your employees is not being completely forthright with you, whether they do it because they disagree with you or your management style or your plans for the company, whatever, they disagree with you, do you continue on with that person, working closely with them being in a leadership position and having a lot of command and control over operations that could be very, very important to what you're trying to accomplish? Namely, Comey was over the FBI. And you have to work closely together. Do you, as the hiring manager, say, I'm going to let this person hang out and see if we can come to a place where we can work together? Or do you say, this isn't working out, I already don't like their past history, I'm going to say goodbye? That would have been me. 2 meetings with him where he seems like he doesn't want to talk to me. 2 meetings where he's explaining things but not giving the full Monty. He's not being completely forthright. Other occasions where it becomes clear to me that he really opposes my direction. You want someone working at the head of every agency that you're over as the president who shares your vision and ideals. And James Comey has stated on numerous occasions that he does not. So that puts him in a place where he's prime and ripe to be let go. Now, I wouldn't have let him find out he was fired on television. I would have told him directly, but that just points to the degradation that had already occurred in the relationship, that's how President Trump chose to fire him. They had the relationship and the communication structure was completely broken down. And so in communicating with this lady, I said, I would have let him go immediately. Like, day 1 or day 30 or day 60, he would not have lasted 90 days. And she said, well, you haven't given any good reasons for letting him go. I said, of course I did. I told you what my reasons were. And she said, well, those aren't valid. I said, actually, they're totally valid because the situation we're discussing is if I'm in charge of him, hiring him and firing him. She said, well, I wouldn't have fired him. I said, that's because you are the same ideologically as James Comey, because you're a Democrat. She said, you don't know my ideology. That is the kind of crazy talk that you have to deal with liberals. She's obviously pro-abortion. She's anti-Trump, but I'm not supposed to ascertain from those 2 facts and many other things she shared during the Q&A that she's a liberal. I'm supposed to just, completely not think she's a liberal, but also believe that she believes all things liberals believe and is somehow politically neutral in those beliefs. That is when Tucker Carlson said just then that it's so deeply unsatisfying. You can't even get to a place of agree to disagree with liberals anymore because they won't agree with you that you have the right to disagree. They also won't agree that they hold a position. They actually like to say, well, I'm an independent, but I only vote for Democrats. I'm an independent, but I believe in abortion on demand up until after the fetus, as they like to call the baby, the 8-pound, fully formed, full-term fetus has been born and is hours old. You should still be able to abort it. But that's supposed to be the position of an independent. It's that kind of chicanery that makes it so impossible to have a discussion with a liberal, which is why I usually don't. Not because I don't care about, their thoughts and feelings, but because there's no way to get that mush mash of competing thoughts and ideas that they somehow keep contained in their brain into anything coherent that you can then say, wow, well, I agree with you on that, but I don't agree on that. That's how far it's gone. And so when he talks about it being a religious movement, again, I still have a little bit of a problem with the comparison, other than I see what he's saying is that it's practiced religiously. And liberalism doesn't allow for any defections. So it's kind of like Islam in that aspect. Because if you're a Christian and you decide you're not going to be a Christian anymore, you can still come to church. You can still spend time around Christians. They're going to start fervently praying for you because they believe now that you've chosen a path that leads to eternal damnation. But there's no need to kill you or to excommunicate you or to make you feel as if you're no longer a human being. But for liberals, it's the opposite. If you're a liberal and you suddenly start to feel conservative because you realize all of a sudden you're paying an extra astronomical amount of tax, and the only thing you did was get a few promotions after you worked your tail off to get your bachelor's or your master's or what have you, liberals will say, well, you're supposed to want to give more of your money. That's what we're about. You give your money so that we can give it to the poor and the black people and keep them trapped in inner cities so they don't have to be with us and our kids. No, that's not what they say, but that's what they mean. And if you decide, no, my tax numbers are bad. I think I want to look at the Republican Party. They excommunicate you. No more cocktail parties, no more sleepovers for your kids, nothing. You're gone. And if you're black, you're a traitor to your race and you hate yourself. Just like Islam. Really. So if he means religion in that way, then I have to agree. All right, when we get back, we're going to have Nicholas Grossman and more Stacey on the Right. Keep it here.
Hi, this is Kirk Cameron, and I am honored to be partnering with the Ministry of Preborn and American Family Radio to help moms choose life.
Actor Kirk Cameron supports Preborn.
My 4 oldest children were adopted. That is because of caring and compassionate people who help those young mothers choose life. My wife is an adopted child, and her birth mother chose life for her. If it weren't for those caring individuals that help those young moms value the sacredness of life, I wouldn't have my wife, I wouldn't have my 4 adopted children, and the 2 natural-born children that we have wouldn't exist either. My whole family is here because of people that are involved with ministries like Preborn.
Underwrite a free ultrasound and help save a baby's life. Go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com. Or dial pound 250 and say keyword baby. All gifts are tax deductible. Your love can save a life.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a legacy moment. There's a young pastor I greatly admire. About 10 years ago, he and his wife started a church with a handful of people. Today, it's bursting at the seams. Lives are being changed. This young man is a great preacher, a tremendous communicator of the Word of God, a wonderful leader. He has great instincts and great insight about people and direction. But I think the real secret to his success is his humble reliance on the Lord. God has poured out his blessing on this young man because of this commitment. Sometimes with experience and success comes a temptation to be self-reliant. It's so easy to relax and say, I can do this. I've been there before. It is also so subtle and so dangerous. I believe the greatest need in the Church of Jesus Christ today is to keep going back to dependence and reliance on God. He expects us to keep coming to him as the great problem solver. Moses, the great leader, modeled that for us in Numbers chapter 9, verse 8. There's some controversy and question about whether or not certain unclean people could observe the Passover, and it falls into a doubtful area. So what does Moses do? He doesn't just call people together and discuss it. Instead, he models to us reliance on God. Listen to how Moses handled the situation. Verse 8 says, Moses therefore said to them, wait, and I will listen to what the Lord will command concerning you. Well, here's what I want you to remember today. It's okay to say that you don't have the answer, but God does. God is not looking for people who always make the right decisions. He wants people who have right hearts and who will totally and completely depend on him.
More information about the ministry of Crawford Loritz can be found online at livingalegacy.org.
Welcome back to Stacey on the Right.
And I really think we have a very good chance of doing something very meaningful. And if anybody would have said that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even a year ago, you would have said that's not possible.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah, big win for this administration, and clearly the biggest foreign policy win, I would say, of this presidency. The question is now, what happens at that meeting with Kim Jong-un? Will he dismantle permanent, verifiable, irreversible dismantling? PVID is what the United States wants there, or is it going to be something less than that? And that would be disappointment to this president.
Was that Stephanie Ruhle and her crew over at CNN saying nice things about President Trump and his administration in the wake of 3 prisoners coming home from North Korea? I think it was. So happy Friday to you. There's your present. CNN saying something nice about President Trump. All right, now it's time for our guest. We have Nicholas Grossman, professor of international relations at the University of Illinois. Professor Grossman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Stacey. Thanks for having me.
Hello. So it's a great time to have you on the show because North Korea is like every other word out of every person's mouth right now.
Right, it's either North Korea or Iran.
Right. So let's cover both of those. First off, do you think that as some there's been some smaller websites have reported that they think President Trump has been snookered or he's been fooled by the North Koreans because they're really a proxy state for China and they're only now cooperating with him so that they can unify the peninsula, denuclearize it, meaning take American nukes out of the picture, and then they'll begin to advance with their nuclear aggressions again, and we won't have anything to negotiate with them for because they will already have kind of rebonded with the South?
I think that's excessively pessimistic. That caution is warranted because what we're seeing now with North Korea are things that we've seen somewhat before. So, for example, it's really great that President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo were able to get those hostages released. But North Korea also released hostages under Obama, released hostages under Clinton. And similarly, we saw big South Korea, North Korea photo op summits under both Clinton and Bush, and neither of those led anywhere. So those on their own, they're positive steps, but, we're not quite there yet. But I think that enough is different now than in previous situations that there is reason for at least some cautious optimism. That one of them is Trump is approaching this differently than other presidents have. I think it's one thing that's clear is North Korea is more afraid that Trump would order an attack on them than they were afraid of Obama. And Kim Jong-un also, this is the first time he's entering into these negotiations, and his father trained him, basically raised him from birth to lead the country, but his father's dead, and he's not his father, so there's always a possibility that he takes a different path. And North Korea also is approaching this in a much different position, where every previous negotiation, they didn't have nukes yet, and now they do, and that puts them in a more confident position than maybe they would be able to give up something. I wouldn't expect them to give up all of their nuclear weapons. If that happens, I'll be so pleased, but I'll be very surprised. But steps towards stabilizing the region and getting North Korea to act less threatening, to basically be more like a normal country, I think are possible. So it's typical that they would try to play the American president. Everybody in international negotiations tries to play each other, but that also doesn't mean that Trump would fall for it. And they might actually be approaching this with a hope of trying to get some sort of deal with the U.S., which is a great opportunity.
So and obviously, so you're an expert on this. I view this much more from the kind of, I'm an American, heavy news consumer, that type of thing, but definitely not from an expert status. I understand I'm not an expert. I don't even try to be in this area. But I have to say, in my mind, when I think about President Trump spending time with the president of China and the time he has spent thus far in his presidency with the president of North Korea, and when I think about the way he talks and the way he tweets and his demeanor and how it's been pretty consistent, so it's not like he's really changeable. He really seems to have one lane that he stays in. He's pretty open with his thoughts. He does deals behind the scenes, but for the most part, if there's something he wants to share, he doesn't squeeze it out or pass it out slowly. He just puts it out there and in the most blunt terms. So isn't it kind of likely that during these very candid moments with the president of China, he made it clear that it matters not to him whether or not North Korea continues to exist? He tweeted as much, that he would as soon destroy the entire country and everyone in it. And during their time at Mar-a-Lago, where they golfed and they spent all that time together, the president of China and Donald Trump, that the president kind of made it clear that he really, whatever the repercussions would be, if he thought North Korea really was going to attack America, he would level it and then deal with the repercussions later. Do you think that's a part of what just happened here?
I think that's probably part of it. The idea that if North Korea attacked first, that the United States would destroy it is something that basically every president would do. That one's a no-brainer. But on the idea of would the United States attack more aggressively, so in response not to something like North Korea attacking the U.S. or even attacking, killing a lot of people in South Korea, but in response to things like nuclear tests, missile tests, other things that are illegal under international law, that has the whole international community pressuring them, that all of those things, it seems, where he's at least communicated publicly that he would be more willing to attack. I mean, I think, just from observing it, of course, I don't know the man's mind, but I think he would be more willing to attack. And if that's the public perception I have, that's probably the public perception that a lot of people have in Asia also. And one benefit of both Trump seeming to have a positive relationship with the president of China, but also China's in a position where North Korea has become an increasing pain for them. They've taken a bunch of actions that have shown disrespect towards North Korea, shown disapproval. So, for example, there are typically meetings between North Korea and China, and about 2 years ago, China sent a much lower-ranking official, and that was widely seen as an insult and a way of saying, that they don't approve. And Kim Jong-un, we now know, has had 2 secret meetings in China ahead of his meeting with Trump, which I think is largely a positive sign. That, of course, China doesn't want to see North Korea collapse, doesn't want to see South Korea expand up to their border. That would put U.S. troops on the Chinese border. They obviously don't want that. But they're also starting to find North Korea a liability, especially with Trump's professed willingness to attack.
And so I'm feeling like I'm right there inside of what you've explained there. Like there's a lot of common logical, it just makes sense that they would be really happy with Kim Jong-un making actions that kind of antagonize the United States to a certain degree. But if he went beyond what they found acceptable and became uncontrollable for them, then they would begin to, as you said, show negative, kind of negative actions towards him, kind of snub him a little bit to try to bring him back into line. And now with the election of Donald Trump, they're dealing with a completely different dynamic. You said that any president would say or would hold a position that the United States would completely destroy North Korea if they ever attacked the United States. But I never heard Obama say it. I never heard anything like that from Bill Clinton, who was, he was actually really good on national defense, in my opinion. And of course, everyone hated George Bush around the world because he was so just unreadable and completely, they called him like the American cowboy, which to them was an insult. Donald Trump is the first president I can remember ever actually uttering in a place where it could be seen over and over and over again in a very, like we can prove that he said it, that he would utterly destroy North Korea if they did something aggressive towards us. That's, I think it's a bit different the way that the President Trump went about expressing that than other presidents have done before.
Oh, no question. It's changed the dynamic. And in ways, I think that even some of the people who are pessimistic about Trump's approach to foreign policy have acknowledged can have some value that could create new opportunities for negotiation. So, just a few months ago when there were a lot of people saying that the insults that Trump and Kim were trading back and forth was going to spark a war. Oh, here are 2 crazy people and, they're going to go too far and it'll be like they're on a prison, prison yard. Or
I remember that.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
And what actually happened was, they did it. Trump laid his cards on the table and said, made it clear that the United States would attack and wouldn't hesitate. And that seems to have gotten through to Kim Jong-un in a way that previous presidents approached. And Clinton and Bush both tried negotiation. Obama looked at it as, I'm not talking to them because I know that they're not genuine, but I'm just going to try to ignore them and wait until the circumstances change, until they want to act. And Trump has engaged them directly, and that creates at least an opportunity. I'm still very cautious about it. I think, there's still ways that this could go poorly, where he could either be in a situation where, having declared that just having a meeting is such a victory, where he feels more tempted by a deal. But Trump also seems like the sort who is more willing to walk away from deals if they're not good ones. And then also, there's the possibility that we can make a deal that doesn't actually require North Korea to denuclearize fully, but to stop their program and to do other things that the United States has been asking. One that I'd like the president to ask for, which I haven't heard much in other places, is for North Korea to give a full and honest accounting of all their black market activity. including turning on anybody that was on the other side of those deals. And one of the suspected ones is that they, in 2006, 2007, sold nuclear material to Syria. So something like that would be a big benefit for the United States that could potentially come out of the negotiations that would be short of what I think is an unrealistic goal of getting North Korea to give up nukes. You know, they know that the U.S. took out Saddam, who didn't have nukes. The U.S. took out Gaddafi, who didn't have nukes. But the United States has been negotiating with them, and they do have them. It's basically the only way you can ensure your survival. And I wouldn't expect them to be willing to give that all up, but they might be willing to put limits on the program, to make sure not to sell it to anybody else.
Is that true?
Reduce threats, to accept U.S. presence, all that would be positive.
Nicholas, are you saying that the only reason we haven't already totally destroyed their country from going back from presidents from however long we've been negotiating with them is because they've had or been very close to and now have nuclear weapons? That's the only reason we haven't deposed him? I thought it was because he was so close to the Chinese.
North Korea has a lot of conventional weaponry, has artillery pointed at Seoul, that they could get off about 2 million shots from artillery within maybe a half hour to an hour, and the United States couldn't stop that. So they've always had the ability to kill tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Koreans. There are also some Americans that are stationed within range of those artillery very quickly. So that's always been a big part of it. It's just nuclear weapons add that extra something that it's basically the one ticket to a guaranteed international respect. Everybody has to take you seriously if you have it.
Oh, all right. Well, okay. So we're getting close to the end of the segment, and we haven't even talked about Iran. I don't know what your schedule is like. I know you're scheduled to be here for another couple of minutes. Can you hold over the break so we can talk about Iran?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. So let's have our first question because we have a couple of minutes left here. Let's first, what exactly is the lay of the land now that we've pulled out of the so-called agreement, which really wasn't an agreement because it was never signed as a treaty. It wasn't ratified by Congress, but still people are losing their hair. We're now out of it. Everyone else is mad. Now what?
That's a really good question. I wish I could give you a concrete answer. Things are very uncertain. So one thing to watch will be how Iran responds. They could say, okay, well, that's it. If you broke your side of the deal, we're going to break our side of the deal, and immediately start enriching uranium, moving towards nuclear weapons. At the moment, they seem to be in a kind of wait-and-see mode, which would let them reach out to some other countries. They have a growing trade relationship with China. They are partnering with Russia in Syria. They've been talking with the Europeans to see if they can get Europe to keep up the trade with them instead of joining the U.S. with the sanctions. So they're in this weird wait-and-see period. But then again, they also fired on Israel from their forces in Syria, which is the first time they've done that. So we can already see somewhat of a behavior change just on their end. Then there's also the question of what do the Europeans do? That the Trump administration has been pressuring them to join in on the sanctions, but so far they've been resistant. They didn't want the U.S. to leave. There's also the question what the U.S. does in terms of sanctions. Which sanctions, on who, how much do those bite? What does it do to the Iranian economy? And then also, how does China respond to that? How does India, which has been buying more and more Iranian oil since the deal, how do they respond to it? Do they join the U.S.? And if all those countries don't, then the sanctions won't have nearly as much bite as they did when every major economy was altogether pressuring Iran.
Okay, so I have more questions, obviously, but we're about to hear the music and we're going to go to the break, and you're going to hang on with us, which I really appreciate. It's wonderful to have you here on the show. If you're just tuning in, it's Professor Nicholas Grossman. He is a professor of international relations at the University of Illinois, and he's our resident expert on all things foreign policy, especially for North Korea and Iran, Middle East, all of that good stuff. And it's a perfect time for us to check back in with him. And he has shared so much already, and we're going to delve deeper into this subject because there's a lot for us to understand. I actually have just some questions having to do with China rapidly building up advanced arms for use against the United States, and how that dovetails in with the whole Iran and North Korea and Middle East and United States and all of that stuff. We have a lot going on right now foreign policy wise. So we'll be right back with more. Stay tuned for these great messages, and then we'll be back with more of the show.
There was a time where I was in the middle of doing something, and the Lord just really impressed upon my heart that I needed to buy my wife some flowers. I hadn't thought about it, hadn't done it in a while. And I walk into the door of our little small apartment, and I have the flowers in my hand, and my wife's eyes connect with mine. Her eyes just well up with tears. And I immediately start thinking, what's wrong? What happened? What's going on? And she said, Abe, I've been wanting some flowers, but I know what our financial situation is. And I didn't want to be an additional burden on you because I know things are tight now. And man, it was just a moment where my wife and I just fall more deeply in love with the Lord and more deeply in love with one another.
Tune in to the Hamilton Quarter, weekday afternoons at 5 Central on Urban Family Talk.
By relying on Him. Oh, God. Oh, Lord, I thank you. I thank you, Lord. I thank you, Lord.
Coming next week on The Dwelling Place. Pastor Al Pittman continues to walk us through the Bible, line by line and verse by verse, to let God show us just how timeless His truth is. That's next week on The Dwelling Place.
Where there is no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint. But blessed is he who keeps the law. Our country is suffering because of lack of leadership, division, and a disdain for godliness. Urban Family Talk exists to be a prophetic voice as we speak on matters of religion, family, and culture. We will not be silent on issues plaguing our communities today as we sound the alarm of truth, wisdom, and empowerment. Join the movement at urbanfamilytalk.com.
I had a conversation with my daughter about making mistakes and not getting this Christian walk right. I had to explain to her that none of us are perfect, but we are all striving for perfection. Then I was listening to a song by 10th Avenue North called You Are More. The song really explained what I shared with her and reminded me that the enemy would like nothing more than to use the mistakes and things you've gotten wrong against you. But because of Christ, you are more than your mistakes. You are more and bigger than your fears. You are so much more than the choices you've made. And God's love for you never wanes. It never decreases. It never ceases to exist. Today, no matter what you've done or how bad you think it is, repent and rest in the forgiveness and love of the Father. Extend to yourself the same passion and grace that the Father extends. With a heart for the urban family, I'm today's urban woman, Tony Johnson. Connect with us at urbanfamilytalk.com.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program. It is my pleasure to still have with us Professor Nicholas Grossman. He's a professor of international relations at the University of Illinois. Thank you so much, Nicholas, for staying on and continuing our discussion about Iran. I'm not sure if he has been turned back on there. Professor, do we still have
sorry.
you? Perfect.
I'm here.
Okay, perfect. So listen, I feel like these things are interrelated, and I saw a story out, almost 2 weeks ago, I saw a story about the Chinese using military-grade lasers on our pilots. When they're up in the air flying sorties, the Chinese aircraft will approach, engage our pilots, and then fire lasers on them, and 2 of our pilots have experienced eye damage because of that. And then after that story, I read a new one this morning about how China is rapidly building space weapons and other advanced arms infused with artificial intelligence capabilities as a part of their bid for military dominance. And this is per a congressional study that has been performed that's giving this information. And they're referring to anti-satellite missiles, orbiting killer satellites, swarms of attack drones, hypersonic missiles, maneuvering warheads, lasers, high-speed railguns. These are key systems that China is fielding in the coming years in a bid to leap ahead of our U.S. military supremacy. Does this play at all into the situation with North Korea, which is a bit of a problem for them, but it still works to their favor, and then also Iran and us pulling out of the treaty there?
I think it's more likely to play a bigger role with North Korea. That I'm not certain of any specific connection, but it's hard to think that they're totally separate.
Yeah.
The Chinese have been in this interesting space where they get to build their military, they get to worry about military development, where, unlike the United States, they're not trying to be a global power. So, at least at the moment, what they're mostly trying to do is what the military calls access denial, basically make it that if the United States wanted to operate, say, in the South China Sea or Taiwan or even on the Korean Peninsula, that China could prevent the United States from doing that. And they get to develop their strategy while thinking of it as specifically to counter the U.S., while the United States is trying to continue developing a military to be able to counter anything, to be able to deal with a potential war with Iran or with North Korea, a great power competition with China or potentially Russia, dealing with terrorists, insurgents, and all of that all at once. So China, being so focused on this, has an opportunity to leap ahead, and I think it's the artificial intelligence that is the biggest concern. It looks like the U.S. and China are heading towards an AI arms race.
Okay, so, wow. I knew you'd be the person to ask, but our conversations often turn to a direction that makes me like I can't enjoy my dinner as much when we talk because things are so volatile. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like when you say artificial intelligence, I immediately go to all the things I've seen on, Hollywood movies, sci-fi type stuff. But what is artificial intelligence for the military application? What does that really look like?
The way it's developing, and this goes for AI in general, is not so much like we think of in science fiction of, a robot that you can talk to, like a Terminator or something like that, but more to get really, really good at specific tasks, to be able to think much faster, process information much more quickly, coordinate a lot of actions more quickly than people. So think almost like the computers that got really good at playing chess, or in the last year one mastered the game of Go. And they're very good at these very specific tasks, better than any person. So the way AI is going to go with the military will be things like, for example, controlling swarms of drones. So instead of having, say, one big plane or a few big planes, controlling thousands upon thousands that can work in a coordinated group. That, no people could really do that, even if you think of it as people fighting on the ground. Once the war starts, they're running forward. It's so loud. They are not really coordinating their actions with each other. But artificial intelligence could control all of these drones all at once to be able to act a lot more efficiently than people could.
Okay,
other types of AI do targeting, gather information, say, where a threat might be. But especially it's that kind of more rapid thinking in very specific tasks.
And artificial intelligence can link up and communicate simultaneously between all of the drones and control their activity and react instantly, where human beings, as advanced as we get, we can't communicate with each other mentally without some other device, which means our reaction times are slower and we can't coordinate to that degree. We can coordinate, but not to the same level that artificial intelligently connected drones could. I mean, I could see that as being just lethal. So where are we on that? Where's the United States on that kind of technology, or are we already advancing and that's why they're advancing, et cetera, et cetera?
So the United States is moving on it also, and a lot of this is classified. I wish I could give you, a clear answer, but I don't know it. So meaning, where is the U.S. today? I know that the U.S. is putting a lot of effort into it. This is actually what I just wrote a book on this called Drones and Terrorism, and it focuses on the different techniques that the United States is using, and one of them is to try to get surveillance so that all these drones are coordinating and using the artificial intelligence where it can pick up the video, because otherwise they have personnel watching all these videos recorded by drones where nothing happens. So there's waiting to see if something happens. but the AI can spot something and then potentially alert a person, and that can give the United States a much clearer idea of what is going on in any particular location, any given battle space, say somewhere in Baghdad or near the coast of China or anywhere else than could before. But one of the big problems is one of the big bottlenecks is what they call explainable AI. Basically, machines can now learn on their own, in ways that people tell them how to learn, but that they can learn on their own. But once they've learned something, they can't explain to people what they learned, how they did it. So with something like chess, it doesn't matter. Oh, you did that weird chess move. Why'd you do that? And the robot can't answer. But if you're relying on artificial intelligence to say, oh, there are terrorists in that car, you should blow it up, then before firing a missile and killing people, we really want to know, why do you think there are terrorists in the car? And currently, at least, the AI can't answer. It doesn't know. It just knows that it thinks it's the case.
So are they often right? Or is it just kind of a crapshoot? I mean, because that sounds ultimately useless. It thinks there's something there. It is not. It destroys it anyway. Or it doesn't destroy and it is there.
Well, we don't know yet, but it's moving in a direction where I think that's pretty much inevitable. So there are a lot of things in our lives that we take completely for granted that are run by computers. A great example of this is autopilot. You get on a plane and it goes, up in the sky. It's basically a machine that's flying it the vast majority of the time. And when this stuff was first introduced, people freaked out. What do you mean there's not going to be a person in charge of it? And now nobody cares. And that will likely happen with a lot of the military artificial intelligence also.
Whoa. Okay. So lots to think about there. I found your book. I'm going to put it in the Twitter feed and on the stream so people can, if you want to click the link and head over to Amazon and purchase the book. It looks like something fantastic to delve into. If you want to be scared at night and not able to eat your dinner, and you can thank Professor Grossman for that. So let's pivot back to Iran and all the scariness that's over there. So we've pulled out of the deal, which I've already read up on the stuff. I'm certain that because it was not sent through Congress, it was not actually a treaty that was ratified by Congress. It wasn't really a deal. It was really a deal between President Obama acting as a proxy for the United States and all of these other countries. He hoodwinked them into thinking he had the power to do it, but he didn't. Now he's been shown to, have had no clothes on during this interaction by President Trump. But President Trump doesn't look like a hero right now because everyone really bought that, Obama could make this transaction happen. And so now President Trump says he wants to create a new deal. He wants a new paradigm. And Iran has already announced that they're going to start ramping back up with their nuclear productions and all that stuff. And President Trump has said he's going to put sanctions back on. Now what?
So I'm unfortunately pretty skeptical about the possibility of a New Deal. And the reason why is we're basically asking Iran to give up more and in exchange for less while they're under less pressure. So in the 2000s, it actually started with President Bush, and then Obama continued and accelerated it. The sanctions, everybody was in on it. Japan, India, China, Russia, Europe, basically name a country with a big economy, and they were sanctioning Iran, and this really, really hurt the Iranian economy. So the economy there is still not in great shape, but Iran has increased a lot of its trade with China in particular. With India, I wouldn't expect China especially to agree to sanction Iran. That would mean that they have to voluntarily give up a lot of money for a policy that they don't agree with. They didn't want the U.S. to leave the deal. And so the possibility that the Iranians agree to it, I wouldn't really expect that to happen, especially because now that Trump said, we had this deal. It wasn't a legal treaty. It wasn't ratified by the Senate, so the president definitely has the power to do it, but he also had the power to stay in. And from the Iranians' perspective, since they thought they were honoring the deal, and the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency that does the monitoring, along with American and British and other intelligence agencies thought so too. And so from Iran's perspective, that if they give in now, then they just show that they can be walked all over. So I think a lot of the pressure that the United States is going to have to apply will be not just more sanctions, but also getting closer with various allies in the region, Israel in particular, Saudi Arabia, and potentially pressuring Iran militarily, not, say, starting a war tomorrow, but at least threatening one and trying to counter Iran in various other places in the Middle East, like Syria, Yemen, Iraq.
I get that they don't want to lose face, but what about what was said last week with whichever week it was, the week before last, whenever Prime Minister Netanyahu came out with the ton of documents, intelligence documents that they smuggled out of Iran, and it became clear that, at least in Israel's mind, the deal was not being adhered to, or there was no plan to stop enriching uranium and moving towards getting a bomb, and that the schedule of inspections with the 24-hour or 48-hour notice, that was really, not legitimate. What about all of that?
So I watched that presentation very closely, and I paid attention to a lot of the announcements beforehand. And what the Israelis showed was a really amazing trove of documents that some Mossad officers managed to smuggle out of Iran. But what it showed was that Iran was pursuing a nuclear weapon back in 2003. And this was something that basically everybody suspected, but the Iranians kept on saying, no, it was always peaceful. We never want nuclear weapons. We would never do anything like that. And what the documents that Israel got showed is that was a lie. And it's good to have official proof of it, and there's probably more information in there as people start combing through them. But it didn't tell us something that we didn't know, or at least, didn't suspect. I was always operating under the assumption that Iran was lying, and I was far from the only one in that. So now we have proof. But they didn't make concrete examples of how Iran was violating the deal now, except that under an agreement with the IAEA, separate from the Iran deal, they were supposed to reveal all their past activity, and obviously they didn't do that.
So doesn't that point to an extremely wobbly foundation for the current deal? If they were that duplicitous back then, why are we trusting them now? Why does it matter so much now?
Well, first, I guess, we're out of the deal, so we're not trusting them anymore. I think the approach towards it was we don't trust the Iranians, that's why they need to let inspectors in, and there were some holes in the inspections, which you brought up, but, overall, that they would have to prove it, can't just trust them, that at the beginning of the deal, they shipped most of their enriched uranium, I think almost 97% of it, out of the country. So that's a very easily verifiable thing. If they hand it over, and then we have it. A similar thing that they poured concrete into their one plutonium-producing reactor. That's something that's also easy to verify. So while my guess is, I can't prove this, but my guess is that they were trying to get away with as much as they thought they could, kind of walk right up to the line, maybe stick their toe over it, but not blatantly cross it and give others an excuse to accuse them of breaking the deal first. But now that the United States has decided to end the agreement, that then, obviously Iran has no choice. They have to make do with the new, for them, more threatening circumstances that President Trump has created.
This is why we love having you on the program. This was like a mini course, you guys. You probably could get extension credits if you took notes and you could show your work. This is the best stuff right here. Thank you for your knowledge and for your expertise coming on the program and spending an extra segment with us. We really appreciate it. It's Professor Nicholas Grossman, International Relations at the University of Illinois. That's where you can find him. And I tweeted his book out. It's in my Twitter thread. I'll put it in the other areas here on the live streams all over the place. Sir, thank you for joining us today, and have a great weekend.
Great, thanks.
All right, talk to you again soon. And we'll be back with hour 2 of the show right after these messages. Stay here.
Urban Family Talk. Urban Family Talk.
I'm Will Addison, Director of Urban Family Talk. Do you believe that we are living in the last days? In the culture we live in today, and dare I say even in our church culture, we are guilty of not looking towards Christ's return, but are in fact bogged down with the cares of this world. Do you find yourself more concerned about this world than you are about the world to come? Be encouraged to live as if Christ is coming back today. Stay connected at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Truth, wisdom, empowered Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Steve Pugh. The U.S. Military Central Command says it ramped up airstrikes against ISIS in Syria. Lucas Tomlinson has more.
U.S. military jets doubled the number of airstrikes in Syria against ISIS this week. A new strike report says there were 46 strikes dating back to last Friday, compared to 22 the week before. Last month, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis told Congress the ISIS fight would be re-energized after the return of U.S.-backed fighters of the Syrian Democratic Forces, who had left to fight NATO ally Turkey. At the Pentagon, Lucas Tomlinson, Fox News.
There are several developments relating to North Korea. Greg Palcott has the latest.
More apparent goodwill gestures from North Korea in the run-up to the announced June 12 summit involving President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. North Korean officials telling this week UN aviation officials they will no longer conduct unannounced ICBM or mid-range missile tests because they say there's no need. They already have a nuclear arsenal. Meanwhile, there are more indications that North Korea is moving to close down its one known nuclear testing site. According to satellite imagery and experts, 6 structures have been removed in the past 2 weeks. Pyongyang had promised to dismantle that site and show international inspectors and journalists. Finally, 3 Americans released from North Korea remain in Walter Reed Medical Center for checkups, but they are said to be in good spirits and coping well. We're told they should be reunited with their families today. In London, Greg Palcott, Fox News.
NBC News is broadcasting from the road this week to try to gain back viewers for its sinking evening news broadcast.
NBC Evening News is hitting the road. Lester Holt was in Portland on Monday, then Denver, Chicago, Pittsburgh, and tonight we'll be broadcasting from Raleigh. The network is calling it NBC Nightly News Across America, but inside the Peacock, some are calling it the Desperation Tour, as NBC has given up first place in the evening news ratings to ABC and is in danger of being overtaken by CBS and anchor Jeff Glor. Media Research Center's Curtis Houck.
Here's Lester Holt outside of New York, just kind of trying to connect with the people and everything, when back at home base, everything's kind of in flames right now.
NBC has been rocked in recent months, with former anchors Matt Lauer and Tom Brokaw caught up in sex abuse scandals and some fairly serious journalistic blunders. Add in an anti-Trump bias that's wearing thin in the heartland, and you have a ratings nightmare. But Houck says, to be fair, all 3 networks are in trouble.
They're tuning out. They're watching Game Show Network, or I go back to Pennsylvania to see my family, and they're watching HGTV.
But perhaps even more than the self-inflicted damage, network news is falling victim to competition from, well, you.
It's the rise of the internet and growth of social media. People with a Twitter account and a Facebook and a smartphone, they can create news themselves if they're in the right place at the right time.
I'm Steve Jordahl.
A religious liberty law firm is optimistic the U.S. Supreme Court will take up a case involving churches and preservation grants. Chris Woodward explains.
Morris County has a law that provides funding for preservation of sites recognized as national or state historical sites, and that includes religious buildings. The New Jersey Supreme Court struck down the law, saying the funds could not be given to religious organizations. Beckett Senior Counsel and Vice President Eric Baxter.
We will be representing Morris County on appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing that once the county makes funds available for public purposes generally, it can't discriminate against participants because of their religious status.
If the Supreme Court takes the case, the most likely scenario is that the case would be heard sometime next year and decided that June.
I'm optimistic because several states have already ruled on similar issues and have decided the issues differently. And the Supreme Court was quite clear in Trinity Lutheran that you can't discriminate on the basis of religion in administering public programs. And so the fact that state courts are interpreting that differently on these historic preservation programs indicates that it's an issue the court would be interested in.
I'm Chris Woodward.
American Family News is available online at onenewsnow.com. and download the One News Now mobile app for your Apple or Android device. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Pastor Joseph Parker.
You know, obviously when things are going well, it's much easier to have an attitude of thanksgiving and praise to the Lord. But even when things are going difficult, it's important to know, too, there's never a time that's Now, some may ask, well, what about when you're going through difficult times, when you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death? We can have two different responses. We can worship or we can whine.
Tune in to the Hour of Intercession, weekday afternoons at 1 Central on Urban Family Talk. Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
I share kind of your sense of amazement. What a couple days. And the president tweeted out today that they're going to meet in Singapore, which is, I mean, who could have predicted 2 years ago or 3 years ago that we'd come this far down the road this fast? Now, you know, as the president keeps saying, the deal's not done. His goal is the same as it's always been, which is a denuclearized North Korea. And he's going to stay focused on getting that done. But between his courage in standing up to all of our allies on Iran, report they gave Israel today when the Iranians fired some 20 missiles at Israel, and the Israelis responded by bombing sites in Syria, the degree to which they're moving things. I thought the classic moment this week is the New York Times wondering where Secretary of State Pompeo is and why is he missing when the president announced the Iran deal. And, of course, it turned out, well, he was missing because he was meeting with Kim Jong-un, getting 3 Americans released, and setting the stage for a historic meeting in Singapore. And I would think even for the New York Times, there might be space here for an apology.
Yeah, no such luck. Welcome back to the show, everybody. UrbanFamilyTalk.com and American Family Radio. You can find that at AFR.net. AFR Talk, that's what we're doing up here. You can see all the little logos up above. We've got Urban Family here, Stacy on the right, AFR Talk over there. So we're really glad to be with you today. Happy Friday. It's close to the weekend. You might already be in weekend mode. And if you are, you know what? Good for you. We're close. But I'm going to be working a little later in the evening because we have the candidate forum, the U.S. Senate candidate forum. Right now here in the state of Missouri, we're in the primary season. And so we have a number of candidates who filed who want the opportunity to take on head-to-head race with Claire McCaskill, who is the sitting senator. She's a Democrat. She is, she's all in with the Democrats. She's one of their standard bearers as it comes to their key issues and their platform. And so we're looking for someone who more closely represents the people of the state of Missouri. And you're probably going through similar things all across the country. As you listen to this show, you have similar races, primaries that probably just closed this week or are near closing. One of the races that I'm watching that isn't in Missouri is in Nashville. It's the mayoral contest where Dr. Carol Swain is currently really handily raising funds and doing a lot of voter touches and getting out the vote. And so I encourage you to consider supporting her campaign. She's often in the breaks on here on Urban Family Talk. You'll hear her bringing you news and information and words of wisdom. And she is an excellent candidate for mayor there. She's been radio host. She has a doctorate, fantastic education, amazing American success story is what she is. And so it's really fantastic to see her doing that. So right now you just heard that was Newt Gingrich being an expert as usual, talking about what a couple of days it has been since we had, the hostages freed from North Korea. And so, it'll take some time to digest what we heard from Professor Grossman in the last 2 segments. And I suggest you share those segments with people who are thinking, well, if you hear people say, I wonder what's going on with that, or how does that intersect with Iran or China? Those 2 segments are fantastic to share. Share them. Tell people, look, that this professor came on the Stacy on the Right show and he talked about all this. I thought it was a great interview. He's always a great interview whenever he comes on the show. It's really a blessing to have him with us. So now I want to pivot over to the torture. So I'll go ahead and share. Back when we did torture, part of that time I was closely connected to the military, either on active duty myself or with, loved ones who were on active duty. And I grew up, on military bases. I grew up with a completely different viewpoint on what war means. I saw people in high school, I saw them come back from what was considered to be a slam dunk for us when George Bush was president and he sent Americans over to depose Saddam Hussein, and they were gone for just a short amount of time, and they were just all over the news media in the United States. It was what a success that was. It was a war that wasn't even a war. We just basically carpet bombed them into submission. Yeah, we did. But we also sent troops over there, and the troops who came back were exposed to things. I still to this day don't know exactly what it was, but they came back and women lost their hair. Black women lost some of the color in their faces. I would see them walking around the base. People that you get to know people, maybe I didn't know them personally, but you recognize them. You see them walking around, you see them at the BX, which is like, the Walmart, the PX, which is like the Walmart. PX and BX are the same. Post exchange, base exchange, both the same thing. It's like the Walmart or the grocery store. And you'd see them there. They came back, they looked completely changed. And so I know what it means. I remember being on active duty, and I was slated to go to Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia, and I was going for my 90-day rotation. And the guy who lived across the hall from me, who I only said hello to, I barely knew him. He was on the rotation. I believe it was the one ahead of me where Khobar Towers was bombed. And then he just didn't live across the hall from me anymore because he was killed. So when Americans talk about torture and they frame it in terms that, like, well, the president should undergo torture and then he wouldn't want to do it anymore, I think he still would want to do it. It's not about whether or not you've personally experienced torture. It's about whether or not you understand what war is. And just like the military isn't an equal opportunity type of an apparatus, which is why people who've actually served in the military understand it's not about accommodating transgenders. The military discriminates on a daily basis. The military decides if you're too tall, too short, too fat, too thin. Yes, you can be too thin to join the service. If you have asthma, if you have flat feet, if your hearing isn't perfect, if your eyesight is too bad to be corrected, if the correction doesn't work because you have to have special things for your eyes. There are so many different ways to get disqualified from military service. It's not even worth going down the list. The military discriminates because its primary means for existence, the reason why we have a military, is to not just wage war, but to win wars and conflicts, to maintain air and space superiority, to dominate on land and sea. These are the reasons we have a military force. And so why am I getting so worked up about this? Well, you can feel it coming, can't you? The View. Whoopi Goldberg suggested that Trump should be tortured. I'd like you to try it. Now, this is from Whoopi Goldberg. She hasn't spent a day in the service. She hasn't spent 1 minute under the complete control of the commander-in-chief, who is the president, whoever he might be. Whoever gets elected is commander-in-chief over all of the armed forces. So she's never spent a minute doing that. She's never signed her life away and said, I'll go where you tell me to go. I'll shoot who you tell me to shoot. I'll rescue who you tell me to rescue. I will bring home who you tell me to bring home. I'll go and I'll stay. I'll go, I'll stay, I'll come home and go back again if you say so. And I'll do all of that for the same bargain basement price of all the enlisted people don't get paid much. And you'll do it until your enlistment is up. Whoopi Goldberg's never taken that pledge. She's never raised her hand and put the other hand on the Bible and sworn an oath to support and defend the Constitution of this country. She's never done that. And so whether you're combat, or you've served under combat, or whether you've never seen a day of combat in your life, you need only take that oath, put the uniform on, and then go overseas and understand how much the enemy wants to destroy not just Americans, but specifically American troops, how they want to destroy our country and how they want to destroy us as a people. The idea that we exist and we have the kind of freedom that we have and that we're so, feisty about it. Our enemies do not want us to continue. And this is the reason why we saw what we saw at the Twin Towers. Why did they fly planes into those buildings in our financial district? Why did they kill people? Why did they themselves engage in terrorism and torture? Because their end is that they want to destroy us. That's why. And so it's not okay for me. I can't stomach it when I hear these, she knows nothing. She knows nothing of what she speaks. And she dares to fix her mouth to constantly comment on these really, they're higher order subjects, not fit for her consumption because she has not prepared herself. So on a discussion of torture, it's not about whether or not the president has ever been tortured. It's about whether or not we get results from utilizing methods of torture. If we don't get results and we decide to discontinue that program, it does not negate whatever results we received during the time when that program was lawful and in use by our government. And Gina Haspel wasn't the first one to find out about torture. She worked for the CIA. She oversaw one of our sites. She oversaw some torture programming. But it was our Congress who authorized that behavior. Those activities were authorized duly by our elected representatives, of which Nancy Pelosi was one. So if Whoopi Goldberg would take 5 seconds to educate herself, she could sit on her program and ask whether or not Nancy Pelosi had ever been tortured. And if she hadn't, why not? Because she was one of the people who authorized the program that Gina Haspel oversaw, that she went out and did these things because she was told to do them by the United States government. And until you've actually executed a contract to say that you'll do whatever they tell you to do, unless it goes against the Constitution of the United States, that's your only out, then you have no right to sit up in judgment and say other people should be tortured, especially when we're talking about terrorists, people who killed thousands of Americans. Yeah, they were tortured. What of it, Whoopi? What of it? It's only until you see Americans leave the base where you live and watch them go overseas or go to another theater of war and return different, changed, broken, physically maimed, that you fully understand what it is that we're playing around with right here. And when I say we, it's not me. I'm not on active duty anymore. As much as I spent of myself on those 4 years that I was on active duty, I'm not on there anymore. The we I'm talking about are the ones who are serving now. And people like Gina Haspel, who've had to deal in our government during times where torture was legal, and now it's not. So it's not a comment about whether or not it's moral when you signed the contract and you said that's what you'll do. And the only reason you won't obey the orders that are given to you is if they are against the Constitution. So you won't raise arms against the government. You won't raise arms against other Americans if you're ordered to do so. But if you're ordered to do torture to people who've killed Americans, you're going to do that or you're going to leave your job. That was what Gina Haspel was working under when she was doing the torture program. So let's listen to this ignorant, absolutely uncalled for and ridiculous statement by Whoopi Goldberg, because you're not going to get into your weekend if you're listening to this show without taking part in this heinous activity with me. It's number 5.
Do you believe the previous interrogation techniques were immoral?
Senator, I believe that CIA did extraordinary work to prevent another attack on this country, given the legal tools that we were authorized to use.
Please answer yes or no.
Senator, what I believe sitting here today is that I support the higher moral standard we have decided to hold ourselves to.
Can you please answer the question?
Senator, I think I've answered the question.
No, you've not.
Remember how the gentleman in the White House talked about torture on the campaign trail? No? We got a clip.
Don't tell me it doesn't work. Torture works, okay, folks? Torture, I have these guys. Torture doesn't work. Believe me, it works, okay? And waterboarding is your minor form. Some people say it's not actually torture. Let's assume it is. But they asked me the question, what do you think of waterboarding? Absolutely fine. But we should go much stronger than waterboarding. That's the way I feel.
Well, what I'd like to say is I would like you to try it and see how that, because I don't think anybody, see, I think people who have actually been tortured, who are saying this is not a good thing, you should listen to them, because you have never been tortured, and neither has Dick Cheney.
But why were they tortured, Whoopi? She's talking about one of the architects of 9/11 who has fixed his mouth to try to say that he should address Congress about Gina Haspel and her nomination. Why would we listen to terrorists? Why would a terrorist's opinion on torture matter to an American citizen? Well, I can tell you it would matter to you if you're a hardcore liberal like Whoopi Goldberg, who she's literally with her mouth right there on that show, siding with Muhammad Atta or whatever his name is, one of the guys we still have holed up at Gitmo, who actually thinks he has a right to comment on what we do with our military after he killed Americans. That's who she's siding with. And that's who Senator Kamala Harris is siding with when she grills and asks she's honorable. Gina Haspel is honorable because she did the things we asked her to do, to protect Americans and support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And yes, I agree with Donald Trump. They're waterboarding our people. Why wouldn't we waterboard them? It's war. If you don't like that, then you shouldn't pay attention, because war's going on whether you like it or not. We need the people with the stomach to understand what's going on to make the decisions about this, not former TV stars and Hollywood hosts like Whoopi Goldberg. All right, when we get back, we have our next guest. Buckle up and stay right there.
You never know what the future might be. That's the beauty of possibility. Every human life so irreplaceable. I can't imagine life without you. It's just unthinkable. There's no one like you. No one like you. You're 1 in 7 billion. There's no one like you. No one like you. You're 1 in 7 billion.
We are all created by God with undeniable purpose. Learn more about beautiful possibility at www.radiance.life. Follow us on Twitter at Life Has Purpose.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The Internal Revenue Service allows ministers and other religious leaders to take a housing allowance exemption, but that has now been threatened by a ruling by a federal district court judge. Her decision is currently on hold and has been appealed to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. The Alliance Defending Freedom brief argues that the housing allowance provided to ministers does not transfer public monies to ministers or houses of worship, and nor does it result in any administrative or financial relationship between the government and religion. Therefore, it is a permissible accommodation of religion and is consistent with this country's practice of exempting churches and other religious organizations from government-imposed tax burdens. It is worth noting that the housing allowance exemption actually predates the IRS code. Originally, it was provided for employees who had to live in a particular location in order to do their jobs, people like ranch hands, innkeepers, and military personnel. Hiram Sasser of First Liberty Institute asked, why would anyone ban rabbis, imams, pastors, and other religious leaders from a decades-old housing exemption simply because they're religious? Ken Kuklowski, also of First Liberty, reminds us that the parsonage exemption mirrors other housing allowances for teachers, first responders, and military personnel who must live in the community they serve. Many pastors already pay both the employee and employer taxes on Social Security and Medicare on their housing allowance. Removing the housing allowance without considering the self-employment tax issue would put ministers at a disadvantage in their tax burden. The IRS code, therefore, is a permissible accommodation of religion because it lifts the governmentally imposed tax burdens on ministers and other religious leaders. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Yes, and so our next guest is actually joining us from the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and we are so excited to welcome her. It's Katrina Gulliver, historian, editor, and cultural commentator. She wants to talk about privacy and how we've kind of lost it already. And I'm not sure if we've even really thought deeply about what that means. Katrina, thank you so much for joining the program today.
Thank you for inviting me, Stacey.
Okay, let's talk about this. I kind of know a little bit. I might have a tip of the iceberg on our privacy concerns, especially with the most recent revelations from Facebook and the apps that they allowed, developer apps and all of that, had access to our data. But what more do we need to know about this?
Well, I think it's really interesting that the law itself really has not prepared us for this. We don't really have a strong protection for privacy in the legal tradition in the United Kingdom and the United States. The idea of privacy is not really something that has been covered very well, and that's why we're not protected when these new things emerge, like Facebook.
I mean, that was never more obvious as when Mark Zuckerberg came to our Senate hearings and they were asking him questions, and the senators themselves didn't seem like they understood what they were talking about.
No, well, they clearly didn't understand the technology, but I also think that Zuckerberg didn't understand the weapon he created when he invented Facebook.
Yeah, he almost seems like he's a clueless genius, where he talks about it and he'll say, well, we just want to bring people together. And you're sitting there thinking, you scraped all of the text messages and call logs off of my phone. That's not bringing us together. And he's still kind of looking like, a 15-year-old boy.
Well, you got to remember, he set this thing up as a way to pick up girls at Harvard. I mean, he didn't set it up really for any noble goals. I mean, it's not really surprising that it didn't end up to be great social service there.
So let's talk a little bit about what we can do. Like I don't feel like there's nothing that can be done, but I do think we have it's a really high hurdle to try to overcome, because as much as we may want privacy, we still want access. We still want to be able to use social media and do all of these things. And most Americans want to do it for free. And so they have to have something they can trade in order to give you the free social media.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, as you say, people want things for free. And as we've always discovered with the internet already, if you're not paying, you're the product. And I think that's something that people are only just realizing with a lot of social media. Now, I tend to be a small government person myself, so I tend to shy away from suggestions that we should legislate more to deal with these things. But I think there's got to be more ways that the technology can help us, through people using VPNs, ways of masking their identity online, so that we're not so easily targeted by these people who would scrape our data and use it against us in various ways.
Yeah. So when we talk about that, the paying, let's discuss the paying part. So how much, with billions of people on Facebook, if we just reverted to a paid model where none of the data was able to be, saved or sold or anything like that, what would we be talking about for people? Like, $10 a month, something like that? Why don't we just go there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, in the sense that you're right, that people are very resistant to paying once something has been free. I mean, as we've seen with journalism, for instance, once the print journalism, a lot of it moved online, people really resent paying, even though logically it makes no sense. I mean, 20 years ago, you paid for the magazine. It was called the cover price. That's what you paid. Mm-hmm. But now people feel aggrieved to pay for something once it's on the internet. And I think that's really a cultural thing that I'm not quite sure how we can address.
I almost feel like we need a public information campaign that says, the government would love to protect you from giants like Facebook, but if you're not willing to disconnect, then you should be willing to pay. Here are things you used to pay for that gave you a similar amount of information. And then, so paying for Facebook is actually the best option, because then it makes it possible for there to be other Facebook competitors that you would pay for a better level of access, like the throttling that they do on the Facebook pages, and the ads that they allow to be sold to different countries. And even the Russians were buying ads and trying to influence the election. And if you look at all of the different factors, there's a way to get around this problem. And I just think it has to do with starting to charge a fee, or having a fee-based Facebook alternative pop up. That's the answer.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And maybe that's the way forward. If we had, for instance, a crowdsourced option to create alternatives to Facebook. I mean, I think if Facebook introduced some sort of ad-free option that people could pay for, I'm not truly convinced that they would be very trustworthy with that anyway, just because of how they've behaved thus far. Mm-hmm. But I think there's definitely ways that we could, through the economy, find ways for people to actually pay for what they want without being spied on in this way. And I really hope that the recent revelations about Facebook have been a wake-up call to people who genuinely didn't realize how much information about them was out there in the hands of, God knows who.
Well, what I've seen is that, so in my own personal little circle, I've seen a lot of people have said, look, it's just not worth it to me. There's no option other than Facebook, and I don't trust them anymore. And so they've disconnected, which it's kind of like a dual-edged sword. Obviously, if you disconnect, you don't know what's going on there anymore. But the people who've disconnected, everyone I know is disconnected. They seem fine. They don't seem like anything bad has happened to them. I'm not willing to disconnect because I use it for my radio show. But I also think, it can't be that Facebook's the only option for us. There has to be another way to do the kind of interaction that people do online without giving it up.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. I would say this as someone who does not have a Facebook account. I did have one years ago when it was for college students, and once they changed it to make it for everyone, I switched off. I mean, I think that possibly we'll see other social media options become more popular. Maybe people will start using things like LinkedIn more because if they decide that Facebook is no longer suitable for their needs. I mean, I think that's another way to do it instead of having one central hub for everything. People using specific sites or groups just for particular aspects of their lives, so they're not sharing everything with one website.
So I'm on your piece over at reason.com where you talk about people being shamed for not sharing personal information about themselves. And, you actually, in the beginning of the piece, you talk about how we're not required to carry identification. And as a teenager, you bought booze without problems. You were able to fly domestically without showing ID. I remember flying from Germany to the United States with nothing but our military ID cards. And when we got stateside, if we decided to take a plane within the United States, instead of taking a military transport, we would, fly commercial. We would just stroll through the airport with our bags. There was no security checkpoint. There was no ID checking. If you had a boarding pass, they didn't want an ID with it. They didn't ask you if the kids that were with you belonged to you, or you didn't have to show passports. We just roamed around and did whatever we wanted. You could actually carry a meal, like a burger or something, or a drink from the McDonald's all the way through the airport and onto the plane. No problem. Nobody asked you anything. Things have really changed. And they've changed a lot, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, and this is partly, obviously this is post 9/11. A lot of it is the security stuff. But I mean, it really, to me, it rubs me the wrong way, and I think it rubs a lot of people the wrong way, because our common law tradition is that, no, we don't have to carry ID. We don't have to justify ourselves to the state. They're meant to justify their interest in us. And I think that, unfortunately, not only technology, but, the threat of terrorism and such has led to this sort of greater encroachment of surveillance on us, not just from the state, but, from Facebook and other people who are, keeping an eye on us whether we want them to or not.
So
I think it's increasingly difficult to actually opt out from that, though.
It is. And so some of the stories out of other nations, like in China, where they're giving you a social score that's based on your social media, that if your score isn't high enough, you can't fly, you can't take a train. That's the kind of craziness we'll see from dictator-type countries. But there's a lot more to this. You even go into, you talk a little bit about the different things that are going on, like inflection points, times when privacy advocates focus their attention on the federal government, and back when that was the New Deal. Can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, that's the thing that, as I mentioned, the sort of common law tradition that, Anglo-American legal system comes from. People didn't have to carry ID. People didn't have to justify themselves to the state. And when the New Deal came along and introduced Social Security numbers, this was a way for the government to essentially keep track of people. Now, it was, for the purposes of Social Security, which was this new program, but a lot of people really were disturbed by this. Who is the state to be keeping track of me? I mean, there's a long tradition as well of people resisting things like the census because, thinking it's not the government's business where I live, how many kids I've got, that sort of thing. And so, had the same resistance to Social Security. But now that has become such an intrinsic part of our lives that although it's not a legal requirement to be registered, it's not a legal requirement for us to have ID. To function in today's society, we effectively have to. There is no opt-out option, which I think is the real problem here.
Yeah, I don't even think we think about that anymore. To be honest, Katrina, when we talk about privacy, we only think about the cell phones, the laptops, the electronics. We don't think about the fact that, because I think it's pretty common for people to go exercising, jogging, or running and not have their ID. But it depends. If you live in a major metropolitan city, you wouldn't go jogging without your ID. But if you live, in the suburbs, you might, go for quite a long time running around outside your home with just your phone, no ID. But you can't buy anything, or you can use your debit card. But if you want to use it as a credit, you need some kind of ID. So we don't even think about the level of intrusiveness that represents. We've just come to accept it. And it's not even something that people are willing to fight.
Well, using your debit card, that's another level of intrusiveness itself. The bank has records on everything you bought, the loyalty cards you use at the supermarket. They have all these records of where you shop, where you've been, what you've done, in ways that people just don't think about. But, someone getting hold of that information could basically trace your entire life. Oh,
True.
She goes to this coffee shop on Wednesdays. Oh, she likes to shop here. It's really frightening.
Well, and that's the one that keeps on giving, because I notice when I search something, this is so regular, I no longer get shocked by it, which is I search for something on one device, and when I go to the other device and click on a website, the ads for that item that I've been searching for are coming, and now they come from my favorite stores. So they've literally drilled down, and they know where I like to buy things, and they show me that.
You get chased around by that one pair of shoes, right?
Right. Until I buy it.
Yeah, we've all had that experience, and I think it's one of those things that now the technology is that people are finally waking up to it. But I think, as you say, a lot of people just don't really know what to do about it. I think that there's a great opportunity for someone to come up with perhaps a Facebook alternative. As you say, for many people, they feel they cannot leave Facebook because they use it for their business, or they need it to, contact clients and things. And so it's become so essential so quickly. This is less than 10 years, and it's become something that people feel they cannot live without.
Which makes the head of Facebook and the way he owns the company and all of that much more pernicious. I've noticed so we live stream to 2 Facebook pages and to Periscope, which is on Twitter, and then also to YouTube. And all of the streams are pretty much operating the same, but the Facebook stream, since we've mentioned the word Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, basically since the start of your interview, has been throttled down to 0. So I don't know if that's an accurate look at how many people are watching on Facebook, but I know we had many more people than that actually viewing the show, and now it shows 0 on my little, it shows me how many people are watching, and it's showing me 0 right now. And I don't know if that's because we're talking about Facebook and privacy.
Even as we're talking.
Exactly. I don't know if that's what it is, or if people are still on there and I just can't tell. Nope. The stream has actually stopped. The stream has been cut off on Facebook. So it was streaming to Facebook, but it is no longer streaming to Facebook. And we are not done with the show. We normally stream until the top of the hour. Well, I wanted to just thank you so much for coming on today. It is something for us to think about. What you're saying about taking the perspective back to when we didn't have to carry IDs, that really does give a much more stark representation of what we're going through. I'll give you the closing comment on this.
Well, in my ideal world, I think we should be in a more libertarian state where we don't have to show ID, but I think that given the current geopolitical situation, I think it's hard for us to get back to that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad we have you writing about this over at reason.com. I'll put the link up for people to click through. Thank you for being with us today, especially from the UK. I love Great Britain. I've only been the one time, but I wish I could visit again.
Oh, you definitely should. Thank you so much for having me on, Stacey. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Katrina. All right. So we are going to have just another minute or so here, and then we're going to go to the break, and we'll be back. When we get back, we have the information about China trying to burn through the differences, the military superiority of the United States. I want to give you a little bit more on that. And then we have Tom Bevan, some audio from him talking about President Trump's job approval ratings and how Stormy Daniels, the affair, has not actually been a negative for President Trump on his approval ratings. That's interesting. And then we have DeGenova talking about the Russians calling Mueller's bluff. This is fascinating. So you want to stick around for that. Call lines are open. 866-963-2037. Stay there.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist and creation seminar speaker with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, what was early man like?
Chris, early man was, of course, Genesis man, Adam and his descendants. But evolutionists have a different idea. They claim that the animals gave rise to the humankind. But as near as we can tell, man has always been intelligent and advanced. In 1991, the frozen carcass of a man who died over 3,000 years ago was found in Austria. Evolutionists expected that people from that era were rather primitive. But this guy had a framed backpack, a copper axe, was carrying dried fruit and other foods, a fire starting kit, and a first aid kit. He had a bow made out of the best wood available. He was fully human. And that's the biblical view. Man was created in Genesis, descended from Adam and Noah, fully human from the start. And that's the back to Genesis truth.
For more information, visit our website at icr.org.
Listen to Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp.
I mean, did you hear that?
Pointed.
Remember that you're not only a Christian on Sunday.
And insightful.
Deception and lies have been accepted as the norm from the Democrats.
But most of all, she's on the right.
That scripture from the Bible, it says the heart of the fool inclines to the left. Just kept popping into my mind.
Stacy on the Right. Now heard weekday afternoons from 2 to 4 Central on Urban Family Talk.
Kids can't wait for summer, but 3 days in you'll hear, "We're bored." Prepare now to beat boredom with the Torchlighters DVD series and activity book. Torchlighters is a set of 16 animated stories of heroes of the Christian faith. The companion Ultimate Activity book contains fun, real-world activities with a devotional for each episode. Get the Torchlighters series now and do away with summer boredom. Visit afastore.net.
Since the day the American Family Association began asking you to sign a petition urging the cancellation of 13 Reasons Why, Netflix has made some changes. They've added disclaimers before episodes and even a link to a suicide prevention hotline number. This is progress, but it's not enough. If you have signed the petition, thank you. If you haven't, please do. Netflix continues to ignore our request for a meeting to discuss the dangers of their show. And they're still going forward with the release of Season 2 of this dangerous program. Too many teens have taken their own lives after watching 13 Reasons Why, a program which seems to suggest suicide as a viable option. Your signature and prayers could help convince Netflix to reconsider their social responsibility. Even one more teen suicide would be infinitely too many. Please read and sign the Netflix petition at afa.net.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
You go back and look in mid-December, the Democratic lead in the generic ballot, and that's the question. If the election were held today, would you vote for the Republican or Democrat? Democrats had a 13-point lead. As of today, it's down to 6 in our Real Clear Politics average. And as you mentioned, the CNN poll went from 16-point lead for Democrats 2 months ago down to 3. We've got another poll showing it down to 1 point. So this is real. And it is, just as a point of reference, in 2006, when Democrats won 30 seats, they finished with a 7.9 percentage lead in the generic ballot. And so they're at 6 now, and they need about 24 seats. So I think they're in that range where it's making them very, very nervous.
So Republicans in Congress have been assuming for months, I've talked to them, that they're going to lose big and that Nancy Pelosi or whomever is going to be the speaker. Now they think they've got a shot, but they're concerned about intensity. Voter intensity on the left is really, really strong. How meaningful is that intensity?
Oh, it's meaningful, particularly in a midterm election where it's all about turning out the base, and Democrats have had advantage in that. But again, back to that CNN poll, that was another finding that I think was disturbing for Democrats. They showed that Republican intensity is up now and was matching the level of Democrats. And if that's the case, it's not at all a sure bet that Democrats would take back the House in November.
This is all a little confusing, and Trump's personal approval numbers are confusing, given that the Stormy Daniels story, which is the single most important story ever covered by the American news media, I think we both agree on that, has dominated the coverage for the past 3 or 4 weeks, month, 2 months, I don't know how long it's been. That hasn't had an effect.
No, in fact, it's just the opposite, Tucker. Back in mid-December was Trump's low point in the Real Clear Politics job approval rating. His average was 37. He's now at 44.3. So he's gained, or 43.4. He's gained 6.5 points over the course of that period.
So people, welcome back to the show, everybody. And you were listening to Tom Bevan talking about President Trump's job approval ratings. Tom Bevan is the head over at Real Clear Politics. You know, full disclosure, I've had a piece published over there. It doesn't change at all what he said. I would just caution Republicans against being too optimistic, against going into the midterms thinking, I don't need to turn out, or I don't need to take anyone to the polls, or I don't need to pay attention to the issues that are on the ballot. There are a lot of referendums and ballot issues that have been added in. So these are signature petitions, and those usually increase voter turnout. And historically speaking, it's always the party that has lost power that has the most momentum going into the first midterm election. But this is especially important because Republicans are seeing the president being beaten up in the media. They're seeing a lot of things said about him that aren't true. And they're seeing the entire GOP being vilified as racist, misogynist, and all the horrible things that Hollywood really is are being painted as the GOP. So that tends to depress enthusiasm and depress turnout. And my encouragement to you is, you know, be low key and laid back now. But in November, you have to be single-minded in keeping the agenda going forward. We have not yet realized our true goals, which is number one, defunding Planned Parenthood and the repeal of Obamacare. If you still want those things to happen, you can't have any good reason for staying home in November. You have to turn out, whether it's snowy or rainy or, you know, super, super cold, or whether it's unseasonably warm and you'd rather be outside in your garden trying to catch up on something. No, do all of that, but make sure and get to the polls. Do it in the morning so you get it out of the way and you have the rest of the day to enjoy, and you don't have to kind of try to worry about making it there and having to stand in long lines because the turnout will be high. So if you know that going in, you put the date on your calendar, you make an appointment with yourself to get it done. That's what you have to do. So we're having a little bit of fun over on YouTube because the Facebook live stream has dropped almost immediately after we started talking about Facebook. The Facebook live stream dropped. And so people have moved over to the YouTube live stream. So a few extra people are over there watching who didn't get a chance to finish the show over on Facebook because it's no longer up. I'm not sure exactly what happened, if it was Facebook or if it's some of our own equipment stuff going on, but we're still live on Periscope and, of course, all over terrestrial radio with you. So now I want to pivot over to, because we're a little off the show sheet because we had Professor Grossman stay over for an extra segment during the first hour. So I'm kind of catching up with that now, but it's still good content that we want to get through. So here we have the Russians calling Mueller's bluff. So Mueller filed a lawsuit, you'll remember, we discussed it on the show, against some Russians, basically alleging that they interfered with the election in the United States. He didn't expect them to respond immediately, if at all. Well, not only have they responded, but they're exercising their right to a speedy trial, and they're looking for him to turn over the discovery. In other words, the reason why they've been charged. And so DeGenova is on Fox talking about this unfortunate development for Mueller. It's number 2.
Why would it be bad for this to go to trial?
Well, because they're not ready for it. They indicted a case prematurely against people that they thought would never show up from Russia. And then one of the Russian companies hired lawyers and sent them to court to say, we're here and we want to plead not guilty and we want a lot of discovery on your criminal case against us. And Mr. Mueller's people objected strenuously. They said, we're not ready for an arraignment, that they're not here properly. And the federal judge said to them, Mr. Mueller, you indicted this case It's your case. It's going to trial. Let's start this process right now.
Wait,
and let's
so
give
you're
discovery.
saying that he indicted people without being ready to prove they were guilty?
That is exactly right. He abused the grand jury process, as he has from the beginning of this outrageous investigation authorized by Mr. Rosenstein. This is Rosenstein's monster in spades.
You are a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor. It seems borderline immoral to indict someone unless you can prove he's guilty of the crime.
They did it for one reason only. Mueller needed something Russian, like dressing on a salad, to make his investigation look good. So he indicted 13 people and corporations in another country that he thought would never show up, and bingo, one of them shows up and says, "Prove it, mother."
That's an unbelievable story. Imagine if he did that to Americans, like, I don't know, Flynn.
He already has.
Yeah, exactly.
He's done it to Mr. Flynn.
That's unbelievable. Joe DeGenova, thank you for that.
So, Joe DeGenova, they called that the Russians have called his bluff, Mueller, and they're planning on getting there and doing what they do and making it happen. They're going to fight back. Apparently, they don't feel like they're being prosecuted with due cause, and it's their right under the Constitution to face their accuser and to review all of the information that comprises the indictment against them, and to then fight back. And looks like that's what they're going to carry forward and do. So now we're at the end of the program, and we have a few minutes left, which we can take calls if you'd like. 866-963-2037. I'm trying to find information on breaking news story about the president signing an executive order on HBCUs. And I saw that on one of the comments, I think on the, here it is, HBCUs. So the president has just signed these executive orders. So he's actually going to bolster historically black colleges and universities, doing this by moving the White House initiative on historically black colleges and universities. I'm not sure if that's new stuff. I think he already did that. Yeah, that's not actually breaking news. Someone has just put that into the comments over at the stream, and I don't think that's new stuff. I think that's from 2017 where he did that order, unless there's something new that he's done that's recent. So anyway, I think one of the things that has been really interesting over the past week, especially coming into Friday, was the announcement that we covered earlier in the show. We didn't really discuss it too much other than to say that it's a bad move for Starbucks, that they're going to have all of the bathrooms open to everyone. So the reason why most businesses don't do that is because then you have people who show up and they trash the restroom and they have no other reason to be there. You'll have homeless people use the restroom as a place to kind of clean themselves up, and like their own personal restroom at home. They're homeless, so they use it for that. If you make it a condition, using the restroom conditioned upon you buying something, then it lessens the number of people who are using the restroom and leaves it open for people who are actually frequenting the restaurant to purchase something. I understand there have been some real verifiable instances where a black person has come into the store and said, I'm going to buy something, but I need to use the restroom. You know, you're going to buy a cup of coffee. You might want to go to the restroom first. And they're told, no, you have to buy something first. Well, if you're there by yourself, that means you then have to carry whatever you bought, like your coffee, into the restroom with you. That's kind of gross. So it wouldn't be a big deal if everyone was told that. But on the videos that I've seen, the person walks in, wants to use the restroom, they can't. And then another person comes out of the restroom who isn't black and says that in the video, the most recent one I've seen, he actually walks up to him and he says, have you bought anything? And the guy leaving the restroom says, no, I'm about to go buy my cup of coffee. I asked if I could use the restroom beforehand. He's like, I just asked if I could use it, and they said I couldn't unless I bought something. He was like, I don't know, dude, but I already bought, I already used the restroom. Do you want to use it before I shut the door? Because, the door shuts, you have to have the key. And he goes back up to the front register and he's like, hey, I want to use the restroom. You told me I couldn't, but you let this guy use the restroom before he bought anything. So what's the deal? What's the difference between him and me? And she gets mad and asks him to leave the store. And so apparently this has happened on more than one occasion. And so I don't know. I'm mixed feelings on it just because I know I've been in places before that have these open bathroom policies, and the panhandlers are so aggressive, and it can be so like, it's almost like it's not worth going in there to get anything to eat because you know you're going to be panhandled to within an inch of your life aggressively, like in a threatening manner. And especially if you have kids with you, it's just not worth it to go in. So they might experience business loss, but maybe this is the only medium that they could strike with everything that's going on with their stores. So the other funny news of the week was this woman who has been accused of stalking a man she met online through texting him. She texted him 65,000 times. Yes, you heard it right. 65,000 text messages. This is in Arizona. Apparently, she also broke into a Paradise Valley home, took a bath in the homeowner's bathtub, and sent the 65,000 disturbing text messages to the man's phone after they went on one date. So one date was enough to send her over the edge. She's 31 years old, and she was found parked outside of the victim's home. He also said she repeatedly texted him, despite him saying, "I don't want to talk to you anymore." The police found her outside the house after he called 911, and they told her to leave. And once she left, she started texting the man. So then later, in December, they got a similar report from the same residence, but by the time they got there this time, she'd already left. So now fast forward to April. In April, the victim called a detective the third time saying he was out of the country, but saw 80s in his home while he was checking his home surveillance video. So I guess to clarify, this story starts in July of 2017. They go on a date. She starts texting him, breaks into his house, takes a bath, and then texts him some more when she's told to leave. She's outside his home when he gets home one day, and this is in December. Then in April, this is the third call. He's out of the country. She's inside his house. He sees her on the home surveillance video that he accesses when he's out of town. So then they get there, and this time she's in the tub again, taking a bath. She had a large butcher knife in the passenger seat of her car, and she was taken into custody at that point and charged with trespassing. Now, later, she's released from jail, and she starts sending more threatening text messages, some of them alluding that harm may come to him. 3 weeks after that, the victim calls authorities to report receiving multiple threatening text messages from her. He also explained that they'd met on a dating website and that after one date, she began stalking him. So the total is 65,000 text messages. One day, she actually sent 500 text messages in one day. Like, I'm wondering why he didn't just deactivate that number. She says to him in the text, "Don't ever try to leave me. I'll kill you. I don't want to be a murderer." I won't go into anymore. It's just disgusting. And so that brings us up to May 4th. This is almost a year later. They're called to a business in Scottsdale after a person who's walking by reported that 80s, this is the same woman, is acting irrationally and claiming to be the owner's wife. The owner of the business is the Paradise Valley homeowner who went on the date with her the year before. She was arrested on charges of threatening, stalking, and harassment. And while she was questioned by the police, 80s explained that she sent the man text messages all day, but he never responded. She threatened him because she was worried that he had called police to report her. She's also accused of admitting that she threatened him because she didn't want him to leave and because she loved him. She knew her statements were crazy, and now she plans to return to Florida once she's released. That's some online dating, harrowing tales from the other side right there. Wow. I don't know. You might want to try meeting chicks at church. Just saying. Yeah. All right. That's the show. Thank you for being with us. If you are a St. Louis person, let's say hi tonight at the Candidate Forum. I'd love to meet you and shake your hand. And I'd love for you to be there to hear these candidates. Let's get engaged. Let's get motivated. And it's a great way to start the weekend. All right. God bless you. I hope you just get so much rest and enjoyment and unplug from your little devices. Oh, yeah. Let them go. And I'll be back with you on Monday, Lord willing. Have a great night.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of Urban Family Talk, Urban Family Communications, or American Family Association.
Urban Family Talk. Urban Family Talk.
It was a time when men rebuilt the ruins.